Has Narendra Modi perhaps met his match? For nearly a month, farmers have dug in for a fight over a reform bill that upends the subsidy system at the core of a sector that still employs more than 60% of the country's workforce. Protesters, unmoved by attempts to brand them as dangerous agitators or terrorists, will ask about a deregulation that critics say was too important to rush through Parliament back in September. In what's to become the world's most populous nation, what future for small subsistence farming threatened by water-guzzling, pesticides-hungry cash crops? Many on those farms are day laborers. What future for them? Back in the capital, all eyes turn to a prime minister who, in 6.5 years, has always stared down challenges and protests, be it over demonetization, Kashmir, citizenship for non-Muslims. This time, will he be forced to bend or even to back down? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at India's farmers' protests, and joining us, India's ambassador to France, Jawed Ashraf. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.
Good evening, and thank you for having me.
From Muktsar in the Indian state of Punjab, we hope to connect soon with Ricky Brar, spokesperson for the Kadian branch of the Bharatiya Kisan Farmers Union. And joining us from the Danish capital, Ravinder Kaur, Associate Professor of Modern South Asian Studies at the University of Copenhagen. Your book, The Brand New Nation, Capitalist Dreams and Nationalist Designs in 21st Century India. Thanks for joining us. And from New Delhi, France 24 correspondent Shreya Banerjee is with us. How are you?
Good, thank you. How are you guys?
Not too bad. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. India's Supreme Court has now weighed in, suggesting the government consider delaying implementation of those laws, this after offering to set up a mediation panel. Since late November, those farmers have been rallying. Catherine Viet has more.
Stepping up the pressure, India's protesting farmers are staging a hunger strike.
कि हम सरकार को ये संदेश देना चाहते हैं कि जो देश का पेट भरता है आज आपकी गलत पॉलिसियों के कारण उसको भूखा बैठना पड़ रहा है.
For the past 3 weeks, farmers from the north have camped out around the capital, holding demonstrations against a series of proposed reforms to the agriculture sector that they say will threaten their livelihoods. At issue are the government's plans to loosen rules around the sale, pricing, and storage of farm produce. If enacted, the new laws would mean the end of guaranteed price support for staples such as wheat and rice. But it would also allow farmers to sell their produce to private companies. Currently, they sell their goods in state markets at fixed prices. Economists say reforming the farming sector is a complex challenge.
In this case, what we are seeing is the government actually withdrawing from whatever little support it should give and basically telling the market to do what we're doing. But the previous experience of the market intervention is very clear, that market has always been very happy driving prices down rather than helping because they don't want to incur subsidies.
Farmers say the reforms will leave them at the mercy of big business, while the government says it will double the average farmer's income. So far, talks between both sides have failed to resolve the issue, and the protests show no signs of slowing down.
Shreya Banerjee, we're due to hear more from India's Prime Minister Fridays to address by video link a conference of Madhya Pradesh farmers.
Yes, I mean,
दिल्ली के आसपास किसानों को भ्रमित करने की बड़ी साजिश चल रही है. उन्हें डराया.
Shreya, I was going to ask you, what are we expecting when he speaks?
Well, I mean, there is going to be a lot more of the same, I'm sure, where he said, that there has been a conspiracy by opposition groups and certain leaders and certain, troublemakers who are trying to give farmers the wrong impression, who are trying to tell farmers that this will not be good for them, whereas this government is totally behind the farmers and they really want to see them do better and increase their productivity productivity and double their incomes. So there is going to be a lot of that this is a good thing for the farmers, and these laws are in their interests, basically.
All right, and we heard there a little snippet, but let's listen to the Indian Prime Minister. The Indian Prime Minister who spoke here, this is him speaking on Tuesday.
आजकल दिल्ली के आसपास किसानों को भ्रमित करने की बड़ी साजिश चल रही है। उन्हें डराया जा रहा है कि नए कृषि सुधारों के बाद किसानों की जमीन पर दूसरे कब्जा कर लेंगे। भाइयों बहनों, मैं आपसे जानता हूं, क्या कोई डेयरी वाला आपसे दूध लेने का कॉन्ट्रैक्ट करता है तो आपकी गाय भैंस ले जाता है क्या?
All right, and we do have the connection with Mukhtar and Ricky Brar, spokesperson for the Kadian branch of the Bharatiya Kisan's Farmer Union. Your reaction when you hear the Prime Minister talking about a huge conspiracy to confuse the farmers?
Thank you. I would like to say if the bills are so good, for the farmers, why every farmer of the country is protesting? Why they are on, like in this chilled weather when the temperature is 2 degrees, why they are on streets? Why? If the bills are so good, have they consulted any of the association of the farmer in India before empowering these bills? Have we requested them to give us some bills so that we can be looted by the corporate sector? So this is basically bills for the corporate people. So they will slowly and in coming time, they will take over the farms of the small and marginal farmers.
And that is the big,
I want to,
that is the big fear you're saying. This offer, this suggestion that India's Supreme Court mediates, do you think it's a good idea?
Yes. I'm very thankful to the Supreme Court that it came with us, and even the Bar Council of Supreme Court, they supported us. So this is the first revolution after 1947 that that Bar Council of Supreme Court supported. So why it is the history's largest protest? Because otherwise our generations, they will suffer a lot. If we haven't done it today, we will suffer a lot. If my forefathers have spent centuries to fertilize this land and to produce and to give them food. And earlier they were like, we need green revolution because we need lots of food for the country. Now when they have surplus of it, now they're trying to take over the market. And the other thing is they're trying to create private market committees. They're trying to abolish agriculture produce market committee. So what they're gonna do? How it gonna impact the farmers? They will say, okay, the farmers are paying 5 to 6% of the tax to the APMC. So they will side by side, parallel, there will be a private APMC, not run by the government, but the private people. So where farmers can sell their crops, but no tax, without any tax for first few years. Then they will say, okay, APMC are of no use. So they will slowly and steadily abolish it. And the farmer has to go to the private sector and sell his crop.
Let me bring in the ambassador on this. Ambassador Ashraf, you heard there the accusation level or the fear that's leveled that you're going to see at the outset a little bit of support, but over time, and I'm quoting what we just heard, that this will be a bill that will be one-sided and favor corporate interests.
Well, I think, as you've said rightly, this is about fear, about something that is not there in the bill and that has been repeatedly given an assurance on that there will be no such measure in the future. Now, let me just say what the bill is supposed to do and what it is not supposed to do. One, there are three bills. I mean, there are not one. And together, they are supposed to enable the farmers to have greater options of selling their product, greater opportunity, more opportunity or options to choose who they sell to and at what price, and not to be restricted to that state-mandated local trading area where they are now currently bound to sell. They can sell it to anyone in the country, across the states, in different states, and they can sell their product not simply having to go to that particular area, but sell it at their farm, sell it at their doorstep, sell it on electronic trading. And the Act does not in any way say that the current system will be dismantled or proposes to do that, in two respects, both in terms of the existing trading mechanism, which is the APMC market areas, which has been set up under various state government acts, and two, in terms of official procurement at the minimum support price. Now, in fact, if anything, government has, after these acts were passed, increased the MSP. And over the course of these past 5 years, you've seen that the government has actually expanded the coverage of this minimum support price at which the official procurement is done. It has expanded official procurement. It has guaranteed for the first time that the minimum support price would be 50% or more over the cost price. And if you see the data,
but it will be phased out.
You will see that in the course of these... No, there's nothing in it to say that it is going to be phased out. And in fact, why would the government have increased the minimum support price in September this year after the acts had been passed? It could simply have just let it be and, in fact, taken the ruse that this is a COVID year and therefore we can't do it. In fact, the payments made to the harvest that was made in the month of April is 30% higher than what it was done in the previous year. So the question, what we are witnessing, is a sort of a fear which is totally unfounded. And if you look at the series of reforms that the government has introduced in the course of the past 5 years, whether it is in soil health, insurance, irrigation, in creating cold supply chain infrastructure, we're talking about 119 new projects. All of this is for the benefit of the farmers. The current system, incidentally, covers less than 7% of the farmers. The current system of procurement covers around 11% of the total crop output. And by the way, the state-mandated mechanisms, which we call this APMC, is unable to procure more than 50% or offer facilities for farmers to sell more than 50% of their produce, which means that the other 50% is actually being sold in a not entirely legal way through private traders and commission agents who demand and extract a huge price from it. However,
Ambassador Ashraf, let me ask you on that point.
Coexisting,
let me ask you on that point, because one of the biggest criticisms leveled is that the bill was rushed through and that there was not mediation. You've just heard there Ricky Brar saying he welcomes the Supreme Court suggesting a mediation before it's implemented. Do you agree?
Well, let me say two things on this. I'm glad you asked that question because we were on a different chain of thought. The idea of agriculture market reforms have been there since the beginning of the century, that is, since 2000 onwards. And in 2003, the government had actually put out a model act for the market, agricultural market, and it had circulated it. The government that came into office, which is the UPA government in 2004, and was there in office till 2014, had also proposed and recommended agriculture market reforms along similar lines. In fact, this has been debated and discussed in various committees. And I might add that in 2017, we had actually floated, the government had actually floated a new model act for this agriculture produce trade and commerce, and another one on contract farming. And incidentally, so there has been a discussion, and let me say this, that since this agitation has begun, the government hasn't been deaf to the protest. They have had number of rounds of discussions with the farmers. They have even offered a certain range of amendments, if that were to reassure the farmers that their concerns are in fact not going to come true or their fears are unfounded. These amendments have been repeatedly offered. There have been repeated number of talks. The choice, if it is between simply repealing the act or not going through a process of seeing what are the areas where this act could be further amended or improved, then that doesn't really make for mediation or for negotiations.
All right, let me bring in Ravinder Kaur, because we have to go to the break very soon. Yeah. Ravinder Kaur, do you agree that there has been discussion ahead of this bill?
Well, I think there are two different points in this. One thing is something very specific, that during the parliamentary discussion, the bill was passed with a voice vote and not with an ordinary vote, and it happened in a lot of basically noise, where a lot of people could not hear whether it's yes or no, and which basically meant that it is shrouded in a little bit of murky, like how precisely did this bill get passed? That is one part of the story, which is to do with the specific parliamentary session. The second part is that, of course, the reforms have been, the overall policy of economic reforms is, it's an older one, but and those things have been discussed many times. But that does not mean, as the ambassador is saying, that whether it's the previous government which has been, mentioning or focusing on this, or the current government, this was bound to have some sort of reaction, for the simple reason that one has to listen to the farmers in this case, farmers and workers who are also stakeholders in this process. So I think what has happened is that this very top-down kind of decision-making process, where the stakeholders are not involved, and we have been listening to the farmers' unions, and it's not one union or two unions, there are quite a number of unions which have gotten together across the political divide. So I think one has to pay attention to those concerns that the farmers
pay attention to those concerns.
Of the local...
Ravinder Kaur, we have to take a very quick break. We'll be right back. We'll pick up on that point. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and we're looking at the protests against India's farm reforms that have been going on for more than 3 weeks. We're talking about it with India's ambassador to France, Jawed Ashraf. We want to welcome back as well Ricky Brar from Muktsar in the Indian state of Punjab. Ricky, spokesperson for the Kadian branch of the Bharatiya Kisan's Farmers Union. From the Danish capital, Ravinder Kaur, Associate Professor of Modern South Asia Studies at the University of Copenhagen. And from Delhi, France 24 correspondent Shreya Banerjee. We were discussing about these reforms that... Well, at the heart of them, there's a lot of focus that's been put on what are called mandis. These are government-regulated wholesale markets like the one we can show you now in Haryana state. That's north of the capital, where the wheat farmers have had to wheat farmers normally sell to commissioning agents who act as middlemen. Those commissioning agents handle sales, storage, transportation, even financing. Ravinder Kaur, if we understand it correctly, it would be the end of those commissioning agents, this reform?
Well, I think that is one part of the story. I don't think so. The focus is so much on what will happen to the commissioning agent. I think it has more to do with the whole structure of the local markets which has been established over the years. So the commissioning agents are only one part of the story, but the reason that they continue to be highlighted is to show that there are a lot of middlemen in this. And that, I think, is a sort of like getting away from the core of the discussion, namely that what is going to happen to the agricultural sector, which has already been in a kind of crisis. So if there are some kind of I think a lot of people would agree that some kind of reforms are required, but what precisely is required? So I think what has happened right now is that, an established system which has actually been working is being dismantled without something else being put into place. And I think one of the logics which people continue to say is that, well, it will be a short-term pain and long-term gain. But I'm not sure a lot of people, are prepared to, it's a kind of experimentation with people's lives and livelihoods.
Shreya Banerjee, when you're speaking to protesters, you've been covering those demonstrations for us. Is it just about scrapping the bill, or are they also discussing, the bigger picture when it comes to Indian farming? I mean, the fact that you have these big cash crops that are replacing subsistence farming.
Well, one of the things that they're talking about is obviously this distrust for liberalization, the distrust for market reforms. And what they say when you speak to them is they point to states where this system doesn't exist anymore, like, for example, in Bihar. And they say that, we've been showing these dreams of how our lives will be so much better if we sell to private enterprises and corporations. But that hasn't been the case in states where these regulated wholesale markets have been abolished. And also what a lot of farmers are saying is that in theory we'll be able to sell anywhere, in theory we'll have the freedom, but we don't have the means to take our crops across across borders. And if we don't have if we can't sell them, we don't have enough storage. So that's a big consideration for many of the farmers. And especially in Punjab and Haryana, where this system has been propped up in lots of ways, because as the union representative from Punjab was saying, that it's to feed India. So this was a system that was created back in the 1960s when India was suffering from food shortage. Now that period is over. So we have to look, experts are saying we have to look at it in different ways on how to build sustainable farming. And that hasn't been part of this discussion at all. Market reforms are fine, but how do we wean farmers away from crops like paddy and wheat, which they were forced to farm in the 1960s, or they were given incentives to farm, and how do you wean them off those crops and bring them to more sustainable forms of agriculture? Also, the other point about this kind of farming is that there's an intensive use of fertilizers and pesticides, and those investments have grown over time for farmers. And there have been an increased corporate entities taking part in this market, which has also not helped farmers at all. So you can understand why the mistrust exists. And in other sectors, they've seen, if you look outside of agriculture, privatization hasn't been, the boon that it was, the super life changer that it was meant to be for so many people. In fact, workers' rights are at threat. And another big clause that's been, very contentious is that there isn't any recourse to justice through civil courts if there are any disputes between farmers and corporations or private players. They were going to, the clause was that they were going to be adjudicated at an administrative level. So that was another thing that, farmers were going to lose their bargaining powers. There wouldn't be middlemen necessarily, but at least the middlemen they have a relationship with already. And they say, well, do you think we'll get the same kind of bargaining power with a big corporation? So that's kind of at the heart of what it is.
Jawed Ashraf, Ambassador, do you take the point that, when you look at privatizations in other sectors, that it does squeeze the little man?
I'd like to just stick to facts, not project fears about some things that are not there in the Act or in any of those three acts. One, of course, I'd like to submit to you that the Mandi system that you're referring to hasn't exactly worked the way it should be working. It had a purpose when we had huge shortages and there were exploitation. We're moved from a deficit to a surplus agriculture economy. And as I told you, more than 50% of the crops which are output, which are supposed to be sold to these mandis. The mandis are unable to absorb them, and therefore they are sold in a sort of a grey market outside. Second, you have to look at the number of transactions there is between the farm and the final consumer. There are 6 to 7. There's 10 billion euros of annual losses of crops. Most of these mandis, the crops tend to, food grains, etc., tend to rot. There are problems, but we are still not dismantling that system. The effort and the objective is to create a more varied market, a more competitive environment, and to attract investment into the cold chain, etc.
But does that more competitive market protect does it protect subsistence farmers? Those mandis sometimes give them credit.
I'd like to say something.
Sure.
I'd like to say something about the subsistence farmer. In fact, and I'm glad you brought that up because it's an issue. Now, one of the things about subsistence farm is, you know, in India, the land has been fragmented over a period of time. The families hand down and divide their pieces of land. There are farmers with just 2 hectares of land. It is impossible for them to generate surplus or to have any bargaining power in the market. Now, we are moving towards 2 systems. One is farmer-producer organization, which brings together and aggregates a large number of small farmers. And second, towards contract farming. In contract farming, it's not about the corporates farming there. It's about a contract between farmers and the buyer about producing something at a pre-agreed price, which gives an insurance against the risks. And this law has a number of provisions which would prevent alienation of land from the farmer to any middlemen or to any of the buyers or any of the traders. So there is something to be said about the fact that India is full of small and marginal farmers who are barely able to eke out an existence, but who would like to generate a surplus, who can become part of farmer producers organization, who can enter into corporate into a contract farming. By the way, 20 states already have contract farming laws. This particular contract farming law seeks to only improve it and provide greater insurance. By the way, this law says that the farmer has to be paid on the same day or maximum within 3 days. Otherwise, there will be penalty. In the current mandi system, the farmers get sometimes 2 months, 3 months later, they get their payments. The middlemen deduct interest for the loans that the farmer may have taken. There are all kinds of micro issues which the farmers face, which is being brushed aside with a very broad brush. So to me, we've already seen some great successful examples of contract farming, which has immensely benefited the farmers. And to extrapolate what we have achieved in the realm of milk, that is also in the agricultural sector. We were once a woefully inadequate, short milk-producing country. Today, we are the world's largest producer of milk. And that is because, once again, most of the milk producers in India are not large farmers with 100 cows. They usually have 1 cow, 2 buffaloes, 3 cows. But they form part of cooperatives, part of collective organizations, and they're able to sell their milk produce at a high price. They haven't been losing out as a result of that. We see the same thing in horticulture products. Wherever we've had this contract farming where farmers have come together, we've had great success stories. These need to be also taken into account instead of simply playing on fear. And as I've said before, that government is still engaging with the farmers as a result of these protests to see how those concerns can be assuaged within the framework of the 3 laws that have been passed by the Parliament.
Ricky Brar,
there are specific amendments that can be made.
Ricky Brar, you heard the ambassador there that actually there's too many middlemen right now. That needs to be streamlined, and that these bills will, in fact, help subsistence farmers. You agree?
I am telling you that in 2012 and 12-13, Sushma Shivraj called commission agents as the credit card of farmers. And now they are calling them middlemen. And the other thing about contract farming, I'm telling you, Pepsi came and did contract with potato farmers in Punjab. And it was like they said, we'll buy your crop at 6 rupees per kg. And same year, other farmers who didn't do the contract, they were selling at 10 rupees. but they were forced to sell the crop at 6. And next year, something extra happened. The crop at the end, the market price was 4 rupees, and the contract was for 6. And then they were forced to sell their crops for 4 rupees, because then they started saying, okay, your potato size is very small, and this is not the right color. And this so these are the things. Take example of Bihar. Bihar, they saying they have abolished the AMPC APMC in 2006. And now Bihar, a farmer in Bihar who is having 6-7 acres, he comes to Punjab and he is doing a labor job over here. Why so? If he is so happy with the private mandis over there, why is coming to Punjab and doing a labor job? Because he is not getting the price. We are selling our crops at almost 1900 rupees. And the Bihar farmer is selling his crop at 1200. So who is looting them? The government is looting them. Then now again they will do all these things. And moreover, we are sitting there since it's almost 21 days. Every day a farmer is dying. Who is responsible for their lives? The government is responsible. Nobody is caring. Look at the weather. By elderly people who are 80s, pregnant women, children below the age of 4, 5, 6, they are sitting there and no one is ready to listen. I don't know because the whole thing is the corporate people, who is the people who are like, who spend on their elections, they want to benefit them. What this bill is going to do, they're gonna create a market, a bigger market, and slowly the marginal farmers, they will be forced to sell their land to these companies.
So let me ask you, Ricky Brar, let me ask you then. We mentioned earlier, if we're looking at the bigger picture here, do you agree that India does have an overdependence on things like wheat, paddy, and dare I add to that list, cotton? And how do you make it sustainable for everybody farming in India?
We can make it if government will provide us with the MSP for every crop. Ask them, tell us this crop they want. But who will buy? We started producing maize. And what is the price for maize they're buying? They're buying for 600-700. And what is the MSP for maize? It's about 16 to 1700. Nobody is buying. So they just creating a bigger scene in the media that we are very well-wishers for the farmers. Nobody is well-wisher for the farmer. Farmers are dying. They are like committing suicide, but nobody is listening to them. So what we want, these black bills should be taken back. Only then our protest will be over. Otherwise, we'll sit there in spread of dying by hunger. We should die there. What's the difference? There is no difference. At least our generations will be okay now. Otherwise, I'll show you the contract farming. They're talking about contract farming. They will do a contract. They say we will pay 75% at the time of purchase, and remaining 25% we will pay after the quality check. And who will do the quality check? Their labs. And after checking in lab, they will say the quality was not very good. So they will not pay the remaining 25%. So this is the way they're creating a market to loot the marginal and small farmers. I would request through your media, so please intermediate and so that we should be saved. We are really concerned and worried about our future and about our generations. If
let me bring in Ravinder Kaur on this. Ravinder, what we're hearing there from Ricky Brar, it mirrors what we've heard here in France. We have a high suicide rate in this country of farmers. We have the subsidy system which favors the big farms over the little ones. And we're always having an argument over how to reform the system. Again, this question of how do you make it sustainable in the long run?
I think a lot of people would agree that it has to be sustainable on many grounds, but what the solution is being proposed probably does not serve the cause. I think the root cause over here is that farmers and workers, they do want some bargaining power so that they can deal with the big players in the market. And this probably is not going to happen with the current laws which have been proposed. And I think I was very the ambassador actually gave the example of how India became sustainable in terms of milk production, but that example is not of free market at all. That market that example is of a cooperative movement which began at village levels. And I think this is where the problem is, that somehow the thinking within the policymaking apparatus at this moment is that if only we just bring in private players and open the market without safeguarding the rights of the workers and the farmers, they are afraid for a good reason, that this throws them out to the vagaries of the free market, that they will not be able to bargain. And it has been rightly pointed out that the bulk of agriculture sector in India is 85% marginal and small farmers, which basically means that they will not be able to face the big players. And I think those are the safeguards that we are looking for, which are not there in the current frame.
Shreya Banerjee, who's driving those protests? Is it the small farmers, or is it the big players in India's breadbasket, most notably Punjab?
It is the bigger farmers who are driving it, but the smaller farmers are also out there, and the laborers, the farm laborers are out there. There are several people who are coming from the state of Bihar, as Mr. Brar mentioned over there, who are saying that they don't have the options that they do in Punjab, and so yes, it is a big farmer-led protest, but there are small and marginal farmers out there, and to return to the point of sustainability, I think what most experts are talking about, as Dr. Kaur was talking about, is that there has to be if you're talking about bold reforms aren't market reforms, because that seems to be very short term. What is happening in India, what the problem is India, is that we have depleting water tables, we have drought and unseasonal rains, but farmers are planting water guzzling crops, and we're giving up our indigenous crops to plant other crops that are bringing in more money in the short term. Now, these are the issues that I think any bold reforms should tackle. How do you really dramatically overhaul the agricultural sector, and also how do you create more efficient land holdings, because small and marginal farmers are not going to be productive. They aren't productive. A lot of people actually just plant crops just for them, or for their own needs. So, and then the other question is, a lot of people are talking about how do you wean people off of farming? How do you get them onto, because a disproportionately huge number of people are involved in this sector. So there are lots of different questions, and in the market reforms, there are reforms that are needed in this sector for sure. And in theory, these reforms sound really good, but they are not going to be sustainable over the long term, is what most experts who've been studying this sector say.
Jawed Ashraf, a bigger, bolder reform is needed?
Thank you. Let me first answer some of these questions. And yes, first, as I told you right in the beginning, that this is one piece of a series of reforms that touch upon all aspects of agriculture value chain, from soil health to productivity, to credit, to irrigation, to sustainability. By the way, we have now a concept of a zero-budget agriculture, which speaks of eventually eliminating chemical fertilizers and reduced credit for farmers to zero, in the sense that he should be self-sustaining. Obviously also to the supply chain, because as I said, farmers can produce what they want, but if there's no one to buy them, it becomes difficult. And we can set any amount of MSP. If there's no market, and no buyers, then that MSP means that the government just keeps buying it and putting it somewhere, or just throwing it away as waste. You mentioned repeatedly about sustainability. Do you know that why is there such a distortion of cropping pattern? Part of this is because there were some crops which had unduly high levels of MSP. Therefore, there was lower levels of risk associated with those. And therefore, Punjab, which shouldn't be growing paddy, which is a water-intensive crop, grows paddy, and therefore causes all kinds of other ecological problems. the issue you mentioned about, of course, the MSP now covers 22 crops, not just 2. And so, the argument which Mr. Brar made that the MSP is not there for all crops, it's there for 22 crops now in the last couple of years. So sustainability requires also the right practices and not for price distortions to influence cropping patterns that may be not suitable for particular ecosystem and ecological system. You mentioned about bargaining power of farmers. The only way small and marginal farmers can create those bargaining power is if they are organized in the farmer producers organization. And I might add that the government is in the process of setting up 1,000 farmer producers organization. Those numbers will increase, and they will have the collective bargaining power that comes from the numbers. Safeguarding the rights of farmers. Now, if these bills were not there, I haven't heard any argument that says that the farmers' rights were protected in the existing system. No one has spoken about all the distortions, rigidity, and sometimes even extortion that exists in the mandi system, because the farmer is constrained to only go there and sell the produce to a cartelized system of middlemen. No one has said what would be the alternative.
No one has said what would be the alternative. We're out of time. Ambassador, we're out of time. Just in one sentence, you said in part one of our discussion, you referred to the protesters, to some of the protesters as, quote, agitators. You stand by those words?
Who? I said agitators. I said agitating is different from agitators. They are protesters by whichever semantic you call them, and we take them seriously. I will not get into the politics of protests. I will not get into who's protesting and who's not. I'm only going to, and what were the motives or what has been attributed. That's not my mandate or my job to get into. I would only say this, that the government is taking the protest seriously. It has had a number of rounds of talks with the farmer unions, with the representatives of the farmers. It's a process that we are not shutting our doors to. It is a process in which the government is offering a number of assurances and even possible amendments to the existing Farm Act, and remains open to further discussions with the farmers. I mean, that is the democratic way to go.
That'll be the final word. I want to thank you, Ambassador Jawed Ashraf, for joining us. I want to thank Ricky Brar for being with us from Muktsar, from Copenhagen, Ravinder Kaur, and from Delhi, France 24 correspondent Shreya Banerjee. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.